Michael Maurino, everybody, Executive Director of the Westshore Alliance, which he was just explaining to me kind of what the Westshore Alliance is. It's a special service district in the city of Tampa, and you guys are charged with land use, future planning, economic development. I mean, kind of a lot of different things. You wear a lot of hats.
We try to, yes.
And so you were describing to me kind of how this whole thing came to be, especially the boundaries. Maybe people don't know, but Himes Avenue is the eastern boundary, which would include Midtown Tampa, Raymond James Stadium. And then what's the northern boundary?
Hillsborough Avenue.
Hillsborough, and then Kennedy. But then I also noticed there's some pockets south of 275, south of Kennedy, that would be like Beach Park areas included?
The Bay Center, if you know where kind of Kennedy and Hoover, where the waterfront is, there's some commercial office down there.
Yeah.
So that was originally brought into the Westshore District. And the boundaries were developed in the early 1980s. We were established in 83. But at the time, if you want to build large properties, think of like an Austin Center, think of a Westshore Plaza or Tampa Bay Center, you had to have certain approvals at the state level before you could start working at the local level. So Westshore Alliance created what was called a Westshore Area-Wide Development Regional Impact. And development regional impact still exists today, even though the legislation that require them has kind of gone by the wayside. But these DRIs still exist, one of which is Westshore. And so if you think of why did it go all the way to Himes Avenue, a lot of the large properties that are on Dale Mabry back up to Himes. Walmart and Best Buy was a major redevelopment project back in the 80s and 90s. Having that be part of the Westshore District automatically allowed them to have certain development potential that they would not have had they been outside the district. A project like Midtown Tampa, by being in the Westshore District, their height is not determined by the city of Tampa. Their height is determined by the airport's flight path. So they're allowed to go as high as they can go until the FAA says stop. Whereas if they had been, say, 2 blocks down or off of McDill Avenue, it's a totally different story because now your height is governed by your surrounding development. So there's advantages to why that line was originally taken to Himes Avenue. But you think of those major properties, Raymond James Stadium, Best Buy, Walmart, Midtown, Tampa Bay 1, which is the intersection of Kennedy and Dale Mabry Highway, those projects, all by being inside that Himes Avenue line, allowed for that intensity of development on Dale Mabry, which is where you would want that type of development.
So there's essentially no height limit, right? I mean, it's the FAA, but there's no height limit imposed in any other way within this district.
Correct.
Wow. So that entire piece, right? That whole corridor on Dale Mabry, all of those large parking lots. I mean, look what Midtown turned into. Do you anticipate Dale Mabry north of Kennedy kind of turning into this row of large scale commercial development, kind of like Westshore Boulevard?
It depends on obviously the developer, but also for much of Westshore, you have short lot depths. So think of Kennedy Boulevard on the north side. Those lot depths in some cases are only 50, 100 feet in. So you're not going to have tall buildings because you just don't have the scale of land to amass a project. You look at maybe Columbus and Dale Mabry, you could probably do a little bigger there because you have larger lots, but now you're right next to the airport. You're right next to the flight path. There is potential, say around Cypress and Dale Mabry, like we've already seen with Midtown, and maybe even a little further south. But Midtown, that Tico building is really as tall as you can go while remaining within Westshore.
And that one had to get some sort of an approval, right?
Yes. It had
Nick
to go.
Haynes was on the show. He was explaining that.
Correct. So they actually, when they went to city council originally, the staff looked at it and said, well, this is not consistent because you have single family homes across the street. And that's where the Westshore overlay comes in and says, it doesn't matter if those are across the street. What matters is that it's in Westshore, and this is the boundaries. This is what the city of Tampa has in its code. Working with the Westshore Alliance at the time to create the overlay, the FAA is the guide for height, not the city. And what's happened since then is they put in that Tico building, and across the street, the one single family home has turned into, I think it's 9 or 12
all those townhomes. Yeah.
So it led to a natural step down from the Tico building to that basically multifamily to now single family across the street further deep into that neighborhood. And now that neighborhood even calls themselves Midtown Tampa. So it all worked out in the end.
Yeah.
But at the beginning it was, okay, do we want a building this tall?
Yeah.
But the after effects proved to be correct.
There's always fears going into the unknown, right? But now that neighborhood uses Midtown as a selling point. All the brokers in the area, say, oh, it's a quick walk to Midtown. But before it's built, everyone's like, well, what is this going to mean for the community, et cetera? But it's turned out to be a good project, and people seem to enjoy it in that neighborhood. I mean, that's where they get a lot of the cool shopping done. Whole Foods right there. So there's another pocket I wanted to talk to you about. I think it's south of Boy Scout. An apartment complex just got denied by city council, and I'm wondering why it wasn't in that same argument. I think they kind of denied it based on the height. It was are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Spruce and Lois?
Yeah.
I mean, city council
Still has the power to
yes.
Yeah.
I think that particular project of where the neighborhood is, that is a single family neighborhood, Lincoln Gardens, Carver City.
Right.
Our position when it comes to this stuff is that we support the policies. We have over 400 members. We're not going to individually go out and say, well, support this member's project, because then there's 399 in line behind it. When it comes, though, to development in that particular corridor, Lois Avenue, between Spruce and Cypress is a lot of single family.
Right.
However, there are larger lots like at Spruce and Lois, like the city solid waste site, which is about 25 acres publicly owned land just inside of Lois and Spruce. There's going to be a need to develop additional multifamily in Westshore. People keep moving here. The city has directed new multifamily growth north of Kennedy. So I don't want to speak to that particular decision by city council, but from our perspective, you need to have more residential in Westshore, and multifamily in that location is ideal for this perspective that you're now walking distance to Met West, which has a multifamily going in at the intersection of Boy Scout and Lois. You have office buildings there. You have more development that's going to happen at Westshore Boulevard. And there's still Corporate Center 5 potentially at International Plaza. So we're still building office buildings in Westshore. And if we have a desire as a city to kind of co-locate residential and commercial, we as an organization want Westshore to be a premier mixed-use district. That type of project makes sense. Like I said, I don't want to speak necessarily to what city council decided on. That's their right. That's their ability. They're ultimately the ones who determine that stuff. But from our perspective, we need multifamily. And especially a corridor like Spruce and Lois, it is in dire need of infrastructure improvements. As development comes in Westshore, they're paying into the infrastructure pot. There is an open ditch on Spruce Street that in some cases is 15 feet deep.
It's really bad. Yeah.
So if you allow a developer to come in and say, all right, we have this drainage issue here, we have this stormwater issue here, we have this sewer issue here, are you able to improve upon it by building this project? That seems like something that city should support.
Getting the developer to improve that infrastructure, you're saying?
Where the north...
pull it up on Google Earth just so we can kind of see this intersection.
The northeast corner of
so go north,
Spruce
David.
and Lois.
Yeah, let's get David hooked up here. So Spruce and Lois, you're close. So you're going to go west.
You look at where the Concord Career Institute.
Right here, David. I'm sorry, east. Now, the City of Tampa Solid Waste, that's a large property. Spruce recently, I believe, got repaved. It was pretty bad for a long time. Put the little man down on that intersection.
You are correct. It has been repaved.
This really was a tricky thought process to work through for me, because I did happen to catch this last Thursday at the council meeting. I was watching it online. Turn around, David, from where you're at. So this is Spruce and Lois, for those just listening. There's already a multifamily kind of everywhere surrounding this project.
The Varela was from, I believe, 2008, 2009 time range. So
So
that's there at the southeast corner of Lois and Spruce.
So you're looking at the intersection, you see this large multifamily right across the street. They basically want to do the same thing. I think it's actually much smaller. It's a much smaller scale. Um, they're going to increase the height to fit the units they need to make the deal work. And on its face, you go, oh, that makes sense. But here's where it gets tricky. There's a single family neighborhood literally right behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a historically black neighborhood. A lot of those people were basically forced into that area. That's kind of all they had to go to. And so it's got some history. You've got generational people there that have enjoyed that neighborhood and its single family use for a long time. City's growing. You've got this commercial district that needs housing desperately. I mean, the word desperate could be used to describe the demand for housing like that in this area. So it's like, what do you do? Council denied it. Now they do have the right, they have the entitlement to do something there. Maybe it's not at the scale they would have hoped for. In fact, I think they were just looking for some waivers, like tree waivers and something like that. But I wanted to talk to you about this because it's not even about this project. It's about this entire district, right? This whole West Shore district is the largest employment center, you said, by certain metrics in Florida, which is a crazy fact. It employs around 100,000 people. And you said they're still building office buildings.
Yes. Yes.
So that just shows you the demand to come and do business in West Shore.
Well, and it's the type of demand too. So this project, you're looking at the Concord. So if you kind of imagine yourself, you're driving north on Lois Avenue, going towards International Plaza. You get to the intersection of Lois and Spruce, the Concord Institute, which is a one-story office building. That's on the left side of your street. And on the right side of your street, on that northeast corner, is what was the Five Labs building. That building has been there for quite a while. My dad worked in that building 30 years ago. This is a prime site for redevelopment. So there's two issues here. One is the issue, like you mentioned, Lincoln Gardens, Carver City was established in the 1950s. It was established because you had returning African-American soldiers coming back from World War II. They were officers. They were entitled to base housing at MacDill. MacDill was segregated. So you had African-American officers in the U.S. Army, Air Force, who were told, well, you got to live up here. Those families are still in the neighborhood to this day. They have been the leaders in that neighborhood association to this day. So there's a natural conflict between, just like anywhere in the city, redevelopment or new development and the families who have been there possibly for generations. And then obviously there's a historical aspect to it. The other problem with this site is that when Lincoln Gardens Carver City developed, it obviously did not have the best infrastructure. So what you're seeing on the screen here and what you can imagine driving north is that there is, in some cases, a 15-foot deep ditch along Spruce Street. So as it goes into the single-family neighborhood of Lincoln Gardens, it becomes less of a ditch and more of a gully. But in the summertime, when it rains, that water will come up almost to people's houses. And I've driven on Spruce where I've seen moms pushing baby strollers through the muck because there's no sidewalk there.
Yeah.
How are we ever going to improve the street corridor unless there's some way to generate more redevelopment, more private development here? So I think, again, not to speak necessarily to this project and promote one over the other, but I think one of the things that I would encourage people to think about when it comes to these types of projects is that the redevelopment can happen in such a way that you improve the overall infrastructure, whether it be transportation, whether it be stormwater, whether it be sewer. They're not all going to be perfect. But in this scenario where you have the city repave Spruce Street and said, oh, we did such a great job repaving Spruce Street, that's awesome. Okay, well, there's supposed to be a cover for this ditch. And that's been talked about going back, really 10 to 15 years. You wouldn't tolerate a 10, 15-foot ditch deep in front of your house, deep ditch in front of your house. But that's been the standard for this neighborhood for 60 years.
And it's citywide, by the way. I mean, I have a ditch on MacDill where I'm at down south of Gandy. There's a huge ditch. It's Tampa for a long time was a little bit of a slow town. We had many decades where we just couldn't get things going, and now we can. And now we got money flooded in. People wanted to move their businesses here, people moving here. And so we're in this phase where we really need to try to balance everything out. But I think infrastructure should and is, I mean, you've seen a lot of infrastructure work done in this last administration. So they're working on it. But it's like, how do you blend the two things? What I'm seeing is this is no longer the Tampa of 2005, 2010, 2015, where a developer could look at a site like that on Spruce and Lois, pencil a deal. I'll get a couple waivers from the city and call it a day. The city's putting up a little bit more of a barrier to these developers. You kind of can't just build whatever you want and ask the city for a few waivers here and there. It seems like the developers are held to a higher standard too, in hopes that they will fix infrastructure, make it mesh with the surrounding community, which is a good thing. Like at the end of the day, I think Westshore and this whole city in particular just has an incredible opportunity to grow in an effective way. We don't have to do it like we did in '05, where you have these massive apartment scale buildings. Like I'm pretty sure in this development proposal, I'll talk about it. You don't have to, but I don't even think there was any other use besides like 400 or 300 units. I'm sure we could look it up to verify, but something like that, 350 units, call it. Maybe if they had put in sort of retail for the community, maybe, I don't know, like mesh the project in better with the community, do a wide sidewalk with some shaded trees. I don't know. It's like be more a part of that neighborhood, and maybe they would have a little bit better of a taste in their mouth about it. I think when you try to shove in a bunch of units in a tall building in a place that has single family homes, those people are going to get angry. And they're not going to get angry just here in this historically black neighborhood. They're going to get angry in any neighborhood in Tampa. And you're kind of seeing that grow more and more and more. And I think at the end of the day, people could tolerate growth in their neighborhood a lot more if it came with positives, meaning wider, nicer sidewalks. I don't have a freaking ditch in front of my house or behind my house, right? A roadway that's not all busted up. Spruce Street for so long was terrible. They just repaved it, which is great. But this whole intersection has a hell of a long way to go. I just think people would stomach this stuff more if developers would stick their neck out a little further and be a little bit more creative. It's crazy to say, and a lot of people won't like that, but I don't think that this community is going to tolerate unhinged growth. I don't think you can just put up a stick project and put a bunch of units on a site anymore. I think the neighborhoods have understood, hey, we want something for the intense use. Like we want some wider sidewalks. We want these ditches fixed. We want more trees. Like it's just, there's a little bit higher standard building in the community.
Well, you use the word blend, and that's what there needs to be some sort of kind of coming together on that, because the city cannot afford the types of improvements that this corridor needs. I mean, Westshore Boulevard, the grand vision of it is maybe a $20 million project. Spruce Street from Dale Mabry to Manhattan might be like a $12 million project. How are you going to start to pay down that cost? Because resurfacing Spruce did nothing for the drainage in this community. It didn't. As it relates to our organization, our overlay provides certain setbacks so that there isn't as much encroachment upon the single family neighborhoods, whether it be parking or building size, things like that. We even recently changed it to encourage smaller scale, say a 4-story multifamily building rather than a 6-story building, because the historic conflict between development and single family neighborhoods, whether it's this neighborhood or, like you said, other parts of the community. So the developers do recognize that there has to be this acknowledgement of what the individual neighborhoods want and also what city council wants, because ultimately they're the ones who will decide whether or not the project goes forward or not. And I just think that when it comes to mixed use, you saying, well, okay, there's no coffee shop in the bottom of this, no dry cleaner at the bottom of this. You can walk up the block to have all the mixed use you want at International Plaza, at Met West. You have all the restaurants there off of Boy Scout. So there's mixed use in the neighborhood. And obviously you go out to Dale Mabry, you have Walters Crossing. So it's not outside the neighborhood by any stretch of the imagination. But one of the things that's happened over the years is that there's a lack of connections. So there's places where sidewalks just end in Lincoln Gardens, Carver City. There's places where they could have easily done a trail someplace, and they haven't done it.
Well, let's go to the intersection, David. Put the little man down. I mean, if they build this apartment building and I want to go walk somewhere in my neighborhood, let's see what I'm working with. I mean, are the crosswalks still painted, or are they not been repainted in years and years and years? I mean, look at that. When was the last time that was all done? You got ditches everywhere. But here's the secret answer people in these communities might not want to hear. What's the answer to get all this infrastructure done? What's the answer to spend $20 million on a Westshore Boulevard to get that road where it needs to be? What's the answer between Spruce here, between Dale Mabry and Manhattan or Westshore? The answer is development. You have to have development in order to get the money to fix all this infrastructure. But it's got to be good development. It's got to be development that, again, blends with the neighborhood. There's an answer to it. It's also not the developer's fault that the city of Tampa has basically the highest entitlement right next to single family zoning. That's a tricky pill for them to figure out too, on a different side of the coin. That developer absolutely has the right to develop that property to a very intense use. That's what it's zoned for. That's what it's entitled for. I think the future land use is very, very intense, but it's not their fault. Okay, there's single family zone right behind me. Maybe it's their duty to mesh that well. And I think they believe they tried to do that. But people need to understand that you have to have development in order to pay for this stuff. The city does not have nearly the amount of money to fix all the roads. I think the administration's done a better job recently. I mean, I'm even noticing all the sidewalks in front of this whole area. I mean, right now we're in the Hyde Park downtown area. All these sidewalks around here have been shaved down. There's no trip hazards. And the same thing is done all the way down south near the air base where I live. So citywide, they're doing a lot. Is it enough? No. But can they ever do enough? Probably not. The way we can get there faster is work with the developers actually and try to get them in here and build adequate projects that people in these neighborhoods are acceptable with, happy with, so that council approves them. Boom. And then you get the money and you fix this stuff. I mean, I don't think you can get anything done you've described, Spruce Street, Westshore, without development. You've got to have the development come in to generate that revenue.
Well, and then with Lois in particular, especially between Spruce and Cypress, Lois is a speedway.
Yeah.
There's no true median. The median is yellow paint. FDOT has actually allocated funding to make Lois a complete street. One side is a larger sidewalk. The other side is almost trail width, 10 feet in some places. But that's not until 2028. And FDOT has to do that project because the city doesn't have the money to do the project. So if you live in that neighborhood and you're trying to get out, Lois and Laurel down there, you have just a flashing light. You don't have a true stoplight. It probably warrants a stoplight. But all you have is the sidewalk crossing there. You don't have enough pedestrian crossings in this neighborhood.
And look at this condition of the sidewalks here.
Exactly right.
Here's the question of, oh, well, this development, you could walk to International Plaza, you could walk to Walters Crossing, all these different things. The problem is the way to get there is dangerous. It's unsafe. It's not well marked. All the paint. I mean, I'm not a road guy, right? Expert by any means, but that looks like 10 years. I mean, when was the last time that was painted? And drivers aren't used to any work being done on the road, so they're just flying by, not necessarily paying attention. This has the crosswalk sign. It does have flashing lights, but the roadway is not painted. That needs to be repainted. I just think there's so much infrastructure work that needs to be done. And people are so afraid to enable development because they think it'll add to the traffic, which it will a little bit, more people, more traffic, but you could use a lot of that money to fix some of the stuff that has been neglected for decades and decades, just simply because the city hasn't had the money. So I think all this development is great. And Westshore, I mean, the numbers that are coming out of Westshore, the employment, do you have an economic impact, in terms of the amount of business being done? What's that number?
So there's about 6,500 businesses. It's 40% of the office space in Hillsborough County is in Westshore. And the thing is for Westshore is we are a regional draw. Of the employees who live in Westshore, about a third of them are coming from outside of Hillsborough County. And that's not including people who are coming to the airport on a daily basis, who are, travelers or just picking up folks or whatever. This is the front door of the city. And so going back to that infrastructure part of it, we have always believed there needs to be more attention paid to this. But when you look at this map, the best roads on this map, the ones in the best quality, are all state highways. Kennedy, Dale Mabry, Spruce, Boy Scout. The ones that have lag behind are either county or city owned. So the county owns Westshore Boulevard. The city owns Spruce. The city owns Lois. And historically, Westshore has been a donor district to the rest of Tampa because there isn't a CRA here. There's nothing to capture the growth of the tax revenue. For a neighborhood like Lincoln Gardens, Carver City, or further south of 275 in Westshore Palms, North Bon Air, they've seen this development come in, and the major corridors, the major state highways, they've been improved upon. Kennedy was just redone with wider sidewalks. There's going to be a landscaping plan put in. We are working with FDOT on that. The reason why FDOT put in the wider sidewalks and the landscaping is because of the Westshore Alliance overlay. But we're a business organization. We were founded to support the business community, the business corridors. So once you get 1 or 2 blocks in, those neighborhood associations, we work with them on transportation issues, but from a development perspective, there's that natural conflict. But we want to work with them when it comes to transportation, when it comes to this other infrastructure, because what's happening more often is that a business comes into Westshore, so like Geico is coming in off of Cypress and Rio. That's 1,000 people who are going to work in that Geico building, the old New York Life building. Those 1,000 people, some of them are going to choose to live in Westshore. So how do we then make sure that, okay, well, if they live off of Cypress Street in Lincoln Gardens, Carver City, or if they live off of Gray Street in Westshore Palms or North Bon Air, how do we make sure that they can get to work easily and not have to hop in a car?
Yeah.
Because these Class A office buildings that are being built and they're being maintained do not have Class A roads. And it gets worse when you go inside the neighborhoods. All these roads need to be repaved. Gray Street is a perfect example. All of them. Gray Street is a perfect example. Gray Street, for such a small road, why is it highlighted on this map? Gray Street goes all the way through to West Tampa, and it dead ends into Rome. Rome connects to Cass connects to the Riverwalk connects you to the Green Spine, and all the way to Ybor City. Gray will go to the new Westshore Plaza, whatever that ends up being. It'll connect to Occident Street, which will be built underneath the new Westshore interchange. Occident gets you to Cypress, and from that point, you can go over the Howard Frankland Bridge Trail or the Courtney Campbell Causeway Trail.
Yeah.
So you as a pedestrian can go from downtown Dunedin or downtown St. Petersburg across one of those 2 bridges through Westshore, all the way through West Tampa, and all the way out to Ybor City or all the way up to the Green Spine.
This whole conversation of
But there's not sidewalks on Gray Street.
Right. The interconnected nature of everything we talk about on the show, right? I mean, we talk about Water Street and Gasworks. There's all, and then this whole Westshore conversation, we haven't really touched on it, which is why I'm so excited to have you here today. But does any of it matter if it's not all connected? Like, it sounds like in the last few years, there's been such an emphasis on mixed use development. Just the way people live in America today, American culture, it seems like people want to live and work in the same area. I feel like maybe, when I was growing up or in the early 2000s, it was like, you have your place of employment, downtown Westshore or whatever, and then you live in the suburbs. Seems like more people are not taking that model. It seems like they want to kind of live where they work. Those 1,000 people working in this new Geico office, is this a headquarters or just like a Florida type office?
It'll be one of the larger Florida offices. They have offices in Jacksonville.
1,000 employees.
1,000 employees. So different ranges.
And they're not all going to live in West Chase.
Correct.
Although a few might.
And so from the Westshore Alliance perspective, and this goes back to, how do we sort of manage the natural conflicts of development going forward? From the Westshore Alliance perspective, we need highways, we need sidewalks, we need transit, we need all the above. We're not downtown. We don't have a streetcar. We don't have a Riverwalk.
Would you like one?
It'd be nice. I was listening to the podcast that you did with Councilman Clendenin.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, don't use 275 as a corridor. It should be a corridor. Because if you were to ever take the people mover off the airport property and run it in that 275 corridor, you make up a lot of ground. He's right, though, in that you don't put the stop in the middle of the interstate. The stop has to be at ground level. The stop has to be accessible. The stop has to be part of the neighborhood so you can have that transit-oriented development. But 275 as a corridor, it's a lot cheaper to use that for, say, get from West Shore to West Tampa than it would be to put it directly onto Cypress Street or directly onto Spruce.
Why would it be cheaper to do it that way?
Because the right-of-way is already there. 275 is being rebuilt with a transit corridor. That's why you have that giant median between downtown and West Shore. They're building the express lanes in the middle, but there'll still be a piece left that you could run a transit corridor right down the middle. You could even, if you wanted to, potentially take Brightline into West Shore because that's how wide the corridor will be.
Is FDOT planning on that?
It's part of the plans.
It's part of the plans.
But it's up to us as a community to say, hey, this is the technology we want. This is the thing that we want, and get it done.
I mean, imagine getting off the plane with your bags and having some sort of a, it's like where the rental car facility is at the airport, right? You just stay on the tram. Oh, this is the stop for the rental car. Cool. I don't need one. I'll just stay on it. Boom. And it takes you to West Shore, then West Tampa, then downtown. You wouldn't do it on Cypress or on Gray. Gray might be tricky. It's a little in the middle of the neighborhood, but Cypress Street to me, it would be more expensive because of the right-of-way. This episode is brought to you by the official remodeler of the TBD Podcast, Kohler House Remodeling Company. Built on the belief that every homeowner deserves a premium experience, Kohler House is redefining high-end home remodeling with their commitment to integrity, craftsmanship, and quality communication. Their work speaks for itself, from condos in the towers of Channelside to 100-year-old homes in South Tampa, creating spaces that are both stunning and functional. What sets Kohler House Remodeling Company apart is their dedication to not only transforming homes into beautiful spaces, but to elevating the standard of residential general contracting. From concept to completion, every detail is handled with care, ensuring a process that's as smooth as the results are impressive. To learn more, check out our partner's website at kohlerhouse.net, KOHLERHAUS.net. This episode is sponsored by Chansey Architecture and Interior Design. Rooted in the heart of Ybor City for over 35 years, Walt Chansey and his team are trailblazers in their field. Beyond their work across the United States and the Bahamas, Chansey has shaped some of the most iconic residential and commercial spaces that serve as gateways to Cigar City, including Casa Marti and Casa Gomez. What sets Chansey Design apart is their ability to preserve the soul and character of historic buildings while seamlessly integrating modern design and functionality. They blend tradition with innovation, creating spaces that honor the past while meeting today's needs. Check out their work at www.chanseydesign.com.
Well, so on Cypress Street, the last version of the 275 improvement built the Cypress Street overpass 3 feet lower than it should have been. And that 3 feet may preclude having any transit vehicle that's operated, say, by electrical wire from running in that corridor because you don't have the vertical clearance.
Oops. Why was that done?
It was a design build project, and the required height of the overpasses was not part of the program. There's also a lot of pillars and concrete medians there at where 275 goes over Cypress. And, you hear this stuff and you can kind of understand why people have a sense of, is this ever really going to get built? Because then when it gets built, it's not built correctly. The mayor did a fantastic job getting transit access back on Cypress Street. It had been canceled. Mayor Castor brought back. It was one of her campaign initiatives. Route 11 servicing Midtown, servicing the airport. But you look at this picture, if you go down Cypress Street today, go underneath 275 and look at how big those pillars are. Look at how close the overpass is to your head. That would prevent a modern streetcar, potentially, or a light rail from using that same exact corridor because it doesn't have the vertical clearance. Whereas a people mover taking off the airport could ride the median, basically, until you get to a point where it can kind of pull off 275. Maybe that's Howard Armenia, maybe that's UT, maybe it's Willow, who knows. But we have that space on the interstate. We should use it to help create some sort of express transit system that accesses downtown and West Shore.
Or a proprietary system that doesn't have these standard height limits and can utilize its own power and doesn't need electrical systems on top of it, something like that. That sounds pricey.
You could run right now, if you paved a wide enough space on the interstate, you could run a standard Hart bus and then not hit a stoplight until it gets to Lois. Because you would clear Lois, Hines, McDill, you clear all those. I mean, you could have that as an interim project until you ultimately decide, all right, well, what is the vehicle that's going to get us from Westshore to downtown? In 2014, there was a study called a Transit Assets and Opportunities Study. So it kind of took, all right, we have the streetcar, we have the CSX, we also have this people mover to the airport, and started drawing the lines on the map. And what you realize is that the answer isn't, let's extend the streetcar to the airport, let's extend the streetcar to USF. It's, well, let's get the streetcar to MTC. Maybe we can punch it up to Tampa Heights. And from there, it picks up basically a light rail system that gets you over to Westshore and maybe points northwest. And then you have the CSX line, or maybe it's a version of Brightline, that gets you north and east. We need the streetcar to go north first, obviously. But we already have the people mover there, and that becomes more of a light rail system. Because remember, a streetcar really stops every 3-4 blocks. A light rail does not. A light rail is meant to serve neighborhoods.
Longer distance.
Totally different type of technology. It's also a larger vehicle because it's maybe running less often than the streetcars. I mean, streetcars 15 minutes, on a good day, right? But that's the answer, or we think that could be the answer for Westshore. And you've seen the new CEO of Tampa International Airport, Michael Stevens, saying, we have this vehicle here. They can pay for the vehicle to get to the airport boundary line, basically. They're not allowed to use their funding to go off of it. That's where FDOT has picked it up in their programming for the Westshore interchange. They have found a way for the people mover to come off the airport and come to what's called the Westshore Intermodal Center, which is on Cypress Street between Trask and Manhattan.
Where the old Charlie Steakhouse was.
Correct. Where the old DoubleTree Hotel was. Yes.
Right next to that,
yes.
Right?
And that is a prime P3, public-private partnership. So if you can imagine, like you said, take that people mover at the airport to the rental car center, just bust it through the wall. When you get to that point, it would hug either the 275 interchange or come down O'Brien Street and then end up basically across the street from Jefferson High School.
Go west, David. Let's track this thing. Because I haven't, this is public or it's not public, these plans to look at where this people mover would continue on to?
They're all public.
Sure.
Because that was a 2014 study that I had mentioned that imagines that. The site for the Westshore Intermodal Center was first discussed at this point now over 15 years ago. And the DoubleTree site was settled on in part because it became available and the state of Florida purchased the land. So the DoubleTree was operating as a hotel on land owned by FDOT for almost a decade.
Oh, wow. And before you were executive director of Westshore Alliance, you were, tell me your position, but it was in the same organization in charge of planning and transportation, right?
I was director of transportation and planning, and I worked for, really when I worked for the Tampa Bay Partnership and also Tampa Bay Chamber, that's when I got into transportation. So my first.
So you've been tracking this for a long time.
Unfortunately. It was once described to me as we keep trying to kick the football where Charlie Brown keep trying to kick the football and Lucy keeps pulling away.
Yep.
Eventually we're going to kick it. And that's what's unique about what's happening now in Tampa, I think, compared to other places in the state of Florida, is that we have politicized transportation to a point that is beyond anywhere else. Orlando got Sunrail because Democrats and Republicans worked together. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, they got Tri-Rail, they got Brightline. There's
Metro Rail.
There's the Miami Intermodal Center. They built the Miami Intermodal Center at the same time as they built the Tampa Intermodal Center. That has Amtrak, Metro Rail, and a connection to Brightline. We have Rental Car Center. So what happened? How did this happen? And when you look at the history of Tampa, our transportation was not really politicized. It was, is this good for business? Yes, then let's do it. All the infrastructure that's happened in the city, the most successful infrastructure that's happened in the city, is because there was this connection between we need this for business, but also we need this for quality of life. And now the quality of life has shifted where You still need the interstates. You still need highways. But, okay, I'm working in this new Geico building. I want to be able to cross the street and not get killed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on Westshore Boulevard. I want to be able to walk down the street or go get Starbucks and not have to wait 10 light cycles before it's safe to cross. You had the interview that you did with the family at US 19, and I think it was Drew Street.
Chris Wagner was the attorney.
I mean, that's a perfect example of, okay, well, you built the highway, but you forgot everything else.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that we really need to impress upon just as a community, is that the roads are always going to get built because they have the most amount of users. Well, what are the things that we can do to make sure the pedestrian and the transit park gets built? And that goes back to development, because developers now want all three phases. They're not just saying, how do I get this person into their car as fast as possible and to work as fast as possible and out of their car as fast as possible and into the office building as fast as possible? Because with COVID, you were working at home. You had all the comforts of home. Your coffee machine was there. Okay, well, now I'm back in the office. My coffee machine's across the street at Starbucks, but I don't want to get hit by a car on the way there. Or I have no shade trees.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'm going to trip on the sidewalk in front of my office building. Well, forget it. I'll just keep working at home.
Right.
So how do we make sure that we now have that three-phase transportation network in all parts of the city, all parts of the county, all parts of the region? Because for Westshore, this is a regional challenge.
Right.
Because of how many employees we have coming from outside the county. For downtown, it's a regional challenge because that's sort of the social center. Okay, you have the Lightning downtown, you have the Performing Arts downtown, you have the aquarium downtown. You want people to be able to come in and park their car once and walk and take the streetcar, etc. You shouldn't have to jump in your car. Okay, well, I need to go Armature Works. I'm at the Lightning game. Okay, well, it's going to take forever to take the streetcar, so I'll just drive my car now.
But that's what people do in Westshore, right?
Correct.
And so with the growth coming into Westshore, with all these new projects, and you said before, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen with the Westshore Mall. I'm like, that's why I had you on the show today, man. I thought you'd know, right? But that development is going to bring probably another massive mixed use, similar to Water Street, Midtown, something like that. Maybe, I would assume, into that parcel of land. Massive opportunity for the city, for a developer, for that community. I mean, this could be mixed use apartments, entertainment, retail, etc. Zoom out, David. So how pivotal is this transportation conversation to the success, the well-being, the enterprise of the Westshore Alliance? Like, how are you as the executive director prioritizing transportation? Do you see it as a necessity?
When the Alliance was founded in 1983, you did a podcast where you started with Ron Rotella. So he was the original employee, the original founder, executive director. And he was hired by these business executives on Westshore Boulevard. Said, okay, you're going to be our guy to design this plan. And he did an interview in Tampa Tribune where he said, our number one issue is transportation. That was in 1983. Westshore Boulevard, to be the Grand Boulevard, to be this gateway into Tampa, to look more like an Ashley Drive and not like what it looks like today, we need Westshore Plaza to happen. It's 54 acres. Water Street's 56. Okay, so from a horizontal scale, it's the same. You're not going to have the same type of development at Westshore Plaza because you're too close to the airport. You have flight restrictions. You can't build certain types of residential. So it will be, from a top to bottom, a different type of scale. But we saw what Water Street's done. We saw what's happened in other parts of downtown because of the access to Water Street. The same can be true here in Westshore. And it's especially to make Westshore Boulevard that entrance into the city. You have family, you have friends, you have companies who are flying into Tampa International Airport. The first thing they see is that intersection of Spruce and Westshore Boulevard. And you know what it looks like today, where that Charlie's is going in is a former rental car lot. Up until the 90s, there was actually vacant land on Westshore Boulevard on the north end. I mean, there was a golf course where International Plaza is today. So it's taken a while for us to get to this point. But we want to make sure that that corridor, Westshore Boulevard, looks like a place where you want to have a Class A office building, looks like a place where you want to have a Class A residential building, and looks like a place where you can bring your kids. You can actually walk down the street. You have shade cover that you could go from Westshore Plaza to International Plaza and not need your car. or you could go down Cypress Street and get to Midtown and not need your car. And the redevelopment potential on Westshore Boulevard, you've seen it with where the former Austin Center is, now Westshore City Center. Union New American goes in, the First Watch goes in. All that property on the front side is parking lot, just flat parking lot. I've heard some people say Westshore is overdeveloped. We're not overdeveloped, we're underdemolished. There's so much surface parking in Westshore that can be converted into a better use. And honestly, it starts with Westshore Plaza because look how much surface parking there is on Westshore Boulevard.
It's 90%, 95% surface parking. And then once that's redeveloped, you talk about baby steps, right? Some sort of a shuttle that gets you from Kennedy and Westshore up to the International Mall, maybe a stop at Union in between, right? Some sort of something like that. And then you get a fixed system a decade later, whatever. These things take a lot of time. So it sounds like the pieces are in place in the next 5 or 10 years to dramatically transform this entire corridor. There's a place in Los Angeles getting out of LAX. It's actually very similar. It's kind of a business district near the airport. I don't know the name of it. I've been there before. It was a long time ago. But as you exit LAX, there's this promenade. And in the center, there's these big, beautiful royal palms. There's on either side of the road, large different shopping plazas, some retail, and then large office buildings. And it's a beautiful impression landing and getting into California. You know, the palm trees and the enterprise and the businesses, it's cool. You're right. When you round that corner on Kennedy and Westshore, it's pretty sorry looking. And everyone knows that. And I think we all know it needs to change too. So you believe the true catalyst is this redevelopment here at the Westshore Mall.
Where else in Tampa do you have 54 acres ready to go?
Right.
It will be a challenge developing it because it's so large. Midtown is about 25 acres. So this is double the size of Midtown.
Right.
We know how long it took for Water Street. I mean, Vinnick bought the team, 2011, 2012? He buys a Lightning and he gets, 20 acres of land just by buying the team. So that's really the beginning of what becomes Water Street 15 years later, to today. And the thing I always think of with Water Street is, you bring your kids there. If you have young kids under 10 years old, everything is older than your kid. All those buildings are really new. And so your kid is going to expect a different type of Tampa than the one we grew up in. And the same is true for Westshore Plaza. There are families here who talk about, well, I remember going to lunch at the Burdines. Well, the Burdines became Macy's. Now Macy's is gone. We're now in this next generation of what do we want this to look like? And whoever comes in there is going to have the ability to redo this whole site, create a street grid that does not exist to this day.
Right.
And you need the street grid for pedestrian access and walkability and transit. And as part of the most recent redevelopment plan, there's actually less parking spots on site because they assume, well, if you live here, you go to a grocery store here, you go to work here, you need one parking spot, not three. And that reduction in parking allows for a greater diversity of uses, which ultimately is what we should want as a community. We want to have a diversity of uses that are accessible within 10 to 15 minutes. Sometimes the 10 to 15 minutes is walking. Sometimes the 10 to 15 minutes is by transit. And sometimes 10 to 15 minutes is by car. But how do we make sure that we have that accessibility? And then by adding more supply, whether it be housing or what have you, maybe that starts to address the affordability issue. Because if you have a diversity of housing options, then maybe you will reduce it. Because that is one of the things that we do hear a lot of in Westshore is that people who rent in Westshore would like to live in Westshore. But there isn't the available housing to buy in Westshore. So how do we make sure that we promote, potentially folks who are maybe younger, get right out of college, I really like living here. How do we find that missing middle, that starter home? That's not just an issue for Westshore, that's an issue for all of Hillsborough County. But that goes back to your comments about developers. Mm-hmm. They're providing the supply. How do we make sure the supply happens in such a way that it does relate to the overall impact of the community so that we do have improvements, not just from a family perspective and quality of life, but also economic development?
Pretty sure I saw Finding Nemo there in 2001 at the, I don't remember if it was an AMC movie theater then.
It still is AMC, yeah.
I know it's still AMC, but look, we all have our stories, right? But to me, it's all about the look and the feel. I'm sick of looking at it, to tell you the truth. I really am. So I'm for whatever changes are to come. I hope a group can get it done. What groups would be looking at this? This is a large, large real estate development project. The great news is we've got history here, like Water Street. Some of these firms that are working on these large developments do a great job at this place making, really making these places feel authentic and cool and fun and novel in a way, like unique. But it's going to require a pretty large firm to get something like that done. But what an opportunity. There can't be a lot of opportunities in the country, let alone one of the most high demand markets in the nation. I mean, this is a shining example of a real estate market. We have decades of growth ahead. I'd imagine some big groups are looking at this with, like, their fists together, super excited, because boy, it could be an incredible statement landmark development in our city. Right when you get out of the airport, boom, this whole thing. David, go to the rendering you had pulled up so people can see what. If you're just listening, this rendering is cool. It's basically at the corner of Kennedy and Westshore, looking northwest onto the development. It's really pretty. I don't know, was this done? This is Washington Prime Group. Were they looking at the site? Right. This was from 25 years ago. It's been talked about for a while. And I think a lot of this has to do with the current ownership has slowly kind of acquired some key parcels to get this whole offering together.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So what you're seeing here is the intersection of Kennedy and Westshore looking northwest. So if you think of where the Bank of America is right now on the corner there, if you were looking, you'd be looking at Maggiano's, you'd be looking at Bacito, and then north. That is all on the surface parking lot, because that was one of the original concepts of, could you start this construction while maintaining the rest of the mall? Where Sears is, you probably have to knock that down. But look how much space there already is out there before you even touch the mall. That's why in this rendering, the mall still exists.
So this rendering, what we're looking at, all this scale and density, it's essentially like the Westshore Grand on the southwest corner, that same size all the way up to 275.
Correct. So Westshore Grand is urban center, that kind of circular office building. That was one of the first real mixed-use developments in Westshore, because you have the hotel, you have some retail on the ground floor, you have restaurants and things like that with the office building. So to have that size and scale continue up Westshore Boulevard at 275, not to mention 1 block in off of Westshore on the west side is Occident. Occident will go underneath 275 when it's rebuilt. That connects to Cypress Street. Now you have a secondary corridor for pedestrians, for transit use, creating that grid, which then enables you to have that people scale development that in some cases doesn't exist in Westshore, because Westshore was built in the 60s and 70s and was built for the car. It wasn't necessarily built for the assumption that people would walk. Urban Center was really the first one to make that assumption, as you see with the shade trees and awnings and things like that.
Yeah, what they tried to do is basically close off all traffic and put it all onto major roadways, which was probably fine in the 60s and 70s. But today it just doesn't work. You have to have a connected nature to the entire city. The whole grid system needs to be reestablished. I mean, the sidewalks to nowhere, the ditches, some of the roads that dead end, that only exacerbates traffic on these larger roadways. And if you're going to do a development like that, you've got to reconnect some of these communities that were cut off by 275. So you said Occident Road, which is to the west of Westshore.
Correct.
Is going to go under 275.
When 275 is rebuilt, the 275 Westshore interchange is rebuilt, there'll be 3 new roads that go underneath it. Rio Street, which is near the waterfront by Cypress Point Park, will go underneath 275 and connect to Kennedy Boulevard. Occident Street, which is 1 block in off of Westshore Boulevard, that will connect underneath. That will go up to Cypress. And then Trask Street, which is 1 block east of Westshore Boulevard, that will also connect through to Cypress. Those 3 roads create the grid. Talk about Lois earlier. If you have those 3 roads plus Westshore, well, now Lois doesn't need to be this larger corridor. It can be a complete street. Maybe you have even reduction in lanes in order to have more pedestrian access. But now you have a true set of north-south corridors to facilitate traffic and hopefully reduce the burden on a street like Westshore and a street like Lois to make them more pedestrian friendly. So what you see here, so this graphic, This is a draft that was produced by FDOT. So if you imagine, if you're coming, say, from downtown, you get into West Shore, you cross over Dale Mabry, you would hit Lois first, then you would hit West Shore Boulevard. So at West Shore Boulevard, the ramp access is actually going to change to have some access at Trask to serve the West Shore Intermodal Center, and then obviously West Shore Boulevard. You'll stay at that particular height because you then cross over Oxent, which will basically be underneath you, and Oxent creates another part of that grid that you mentioned. You'll be able to take the express lanes or general use lanes up to the airport, or also then out to the new Howard Frankland Bridge, which has express lanes on it. But having Rio, having Oxent, and having Trask creates a major redevelopment opportunity for West Shore. And going back to the beginning and talk about, we were talking earlier about where do you develop this residential? A lot of the residential in West Shore has to be to the east because the airport flight path comes down. So you cannot build residential off of Rio Street. You can build a little bit south of Kennedy in Beach Park. On West Shore Boulevard, you cannot build west of West Shore Boulevard until you get to Westshore Plaza. And then on the east side of West Shore Boulevard, you can build some residential. That's part of West Shore City Center's plans with the 1515 West Shore, but also you've seen redevelopment, coming in further to the south, whether it be in North Bon Air or, as we mentioned earlier, off of Lois and those neighborhoods as well. Having those three create that grid, and it goes back to like what I said earlier. We're not overdeveloped, we're underdemolished. A lot of these sort of one-story 1970s office buildings are going to have so much more value because now they're not on streets that dead end, like a Rio Street, like an Occident. They're on major corridors now that will be walkable because they have to meet the West Shore overlay.
And as it sits right now, this little pocket, for those listening, we're on the west side of West Shore, north of 275. This pocket right here, right, which is directly south of that north-south runway at Tampa International. As it sits right now, you really can't develop residential in there. You're
correct.
saying?
You cannot.
You cannot.
It's too close to the airport. It's too close to the flight path. So there's an FAA regulation that says you cannot build new residential within a certain distance.
Even if it's single family?
Correct. Oh, you definitely, yes. You cannot do single family. You cannot do multifamily. You also can't do certain education. So like you couldn't build an elementary school under a flight path.
I guess that makes sense.
And it goes back to just after 9/11 in New York. There was a plane crash just south of JFK, and it landed it hit homes in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So after that, the FAA changed the rule. That was obviously an existing neighborhood. But what's happened over time is that navigation has changed, the instrumentation has changed. So you can build pretty close to the line, but you cannot build underneath the flight paths. And that's obviously held not just for Tampa, but
Sure.
that holds for other parts of or Tampa International Airport. It holds for other parts of the city as well, where you have
and the whole
flight
nation,
paths.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is a massive, massive area, right? Kind of that Cypress Street corridor west of West Shore. If you can't put residential there, boy, it's got to go somewhere, because how many people could be employed in this particular area when all this development comes to fruition? You might be talking about another 10,000 workers. I don't know the number. I'm just making it up, but a lot of workers over the next few decades as West Shore develops and grows, especially when the West Shore Mall gets redeveloped. You're talking about a ton of more offices being built. Where are the workers going to live? If you shove them out in West Chase and you don't provide opportunities here, traffic is worse for everyone. Mixed use would help alleviate traffic along with the transportation plan. But if it's not going to go in that little pocket, it's got to go to the area where we originally talked about, which that project got denied on Lois and Cypress, right? It's going to have to go east of West Shore, basically.
Yeah.
Right? So if residential has to go east, it goes back to the conversation of what type of projects are going to mix with the community that's already been there, right? That's been there for generations. I think that developers are going to have to be creative at how they tackle this. It's a little bit of a tricky area, but one that has so much opportunity. What the Geico deal, does Geico has a presence now in Tampa, right? Currently?
Not
or
to
no?
this extent, no.
I think
So
maybe
they
I'm
have
thinking of
office.
Progressive in St. Pete.
Yes. And Geico, I believe, has a service office in Lakeland.
Okay.
But this is a major deal. I mean, anytime you have 1,000 employees
Right.
and you're hiring them locally, it's not like they're transferring 1,000 people from someplace else. This isn't. My family moved here in 1989 with my dad with Chase, and it was, okay, well, we're gonna fly a bunch of you from Garden City and Brooklyn and Lower Manhattan, and you're gonna open this Tampa office. This is Geico's opening this office and hiring people in Tampa. This is a totally different scenario from 30, 40 years ago when Westshore developed with those financial firms. So to your point of where do people go, by 2050, you could see a scenario where there's an additional 40,000 employees in Westshore. So those 40,000 workers, well, those are 40,000 workers. Maybe there's 30,000 of their spouses. Maybe there's 27,000 of their kids. Where does that population go? And that's the stuff that there needs to be a more cohesive discussion about how we develop and the way we want to have development going forward. Because as long as Florida has existed, there's been that conflict between maybe people who've lived here for generations and people who are newcomers, or people who are newcomers and said, oh no, I'm going to shut the door behind me. I don't want anyone to come in after me. And we see that all the time. So there needs to be a more cohesive plan. And I think what the Plan Commission has looked at this with the new comp plan. I think it's pretty good. There's some elements that our organization disagrees with as it relates to coastal development, because the waterfront's here. How do we live with that? How do we live with the potential of more storms? Because we have always existed as a port city. We are a waterfront city. We have to be able to maintain that type of development going forward. We can't say we're never going to hit by another hurricane again, but there's nothing wrong with saying, all right, well, now we know where we flood. We know we have the technology to handle the wind damage. How do we make sure we have technology to handle surge? How do we make sure we have the resiliency? How do we make sure we underground these power lines? How do we make sure that the pump stations work? How do we make sure we have that infrastructure to allow for more development near the coastline?
Resilient
development. And who is responsible for that? Because in some cases, it will be the city of Tampa, but in other cases, it could be private development, because they see the benefit not just for their project, but it enables the network around their project, which ultimately will then help them get more clients, whether they be residents or office tenants, what have you. They want to have the ability to have a diverse neighborhood around them from uses, whether that's a Geico office building or whether it's a residential multifamily building.
When Geico announces or has conversations about, hey, we want to open an office and hire 1,000, local employees, what are they looking for? What do they want? I'm sure they have needs. Are they reiterating some of the stuff that you're talking about? Hey, we need a boulevard. We need a more connected community. We need residents in areas that make sense. We need mixed use.
It depends. So a company like that, where you're hiring 1,000 workers, one of their issues is going to be, okay, well, I might hire someone who lives in Lutz. I might hire someone who lives in Town and Country. I might hire someone who lives in Brooksville. How are they going to get here? The Veterans Expressway, the Suncoast Parkway has been recently improved. That portion of the Westshore interchange is kind of done with. The majority of the construction is going to be on 275 at this point. So that regional access will be important to a company like that. But they're also across the street from Cypress Point Park. They're across the street from a lot of redevelopment potential on Rio Street. They're down the road from Westshore Boulevard. When that property was there with New York Life would have their employees go out and go walk the trail at Cypress Point Park. People would ride their bikes. So as Geico grows and develops, they may find, oh my gosh, we have 50 people riding their bikes here today. We got to make sure that the Upper Tampa Bay Trail doesn't dead end at Van Dyke Road. We got to make sure that people can go onto 580 and get over to Pinellas County safely. We got to make sure that the Pinellas Trail connects according to Campbell Causeway. You just don't know until it actually happens. And that's the thing, that as these companies come in, their employees want more options. We do a bicycle-friendly program with Tampa International Airport, the only airport in America that's bicycle-friendly, certified bicycle-friendly, Tampa International Airport. When we started that program with them, they had no idea how many of their employees were biking to work because they start their shifts at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. There's no heart route that runs at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So they had guys who were living off of 22nd Street in Hillsborough, riding their bicycles on Hillsborough Avenue, probably one of the most dangerous corridors in the state of Florida, in the dark, and parking their bikes next to trees in the employee parking lot. So airport, what do? Well, they do everything, top of the line, right? They build this fantastic bike rack at the employee parking lot on the north lot that's off of Air Cargo in Hillsborough. The new Sky Center actually has an indoor bicycle parking station where you can go in, you put your bike on the wall, literally, and you park it there, and you have pump stations, you have fix-it stations. They thought about that. And, they got the bus ramp out front, and there's bike racks at the bus ramp out front. And people who, ride transit, whether they be customers at the airport or employees, still do that. But they could not believe how many employees they have who start their day in darkness were riding to work on a bicycle because they had no other option.
Wow. Are you finding more larger organizations are listening to their employees and their lifestyles and what they want? This is such, the old models like, well, all we need is the parking lot and then we're good. The rest can solve itself. It doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. Are more larger organizations having conversations with you about some of these different little intricacies and creative ways to get people from A to B?
We see it a lot with the bicycle friendly stuff because I'll use Highwoods for an example. So a lot of Highwoods office buildings have a gym with a shower in them, okay? Well, if you're riding your bike to work in July, you're not going to get to work like this and not be sweaty. Well, they have a shower on site, and that's one of the things that you need to be a bicycle-friendly certified business. So Highwoods Properties has certified bicycle-friendly businesses in their buildings because they built that gym thinking, oh, well, this will be good for tenants. Well, you now have tenants who are biking to work, and now they have the access. They can get washed up. They can, start their day. You would never know that they bike to work. Met West has multiple bike racks because of Atkins and PwC, the other companies that are in the Met West buildings. They have 3 or 4 bike racks in there, and they're always full. And if you ever go to Kona Grill, that bike rack is probably the most used bike rack in that whole complex because it's guys and girls who are wiping down tables, who are pushing mops. That's how they get to work in Westshore because we don't have the transit network. Same is true of International Plaza. The Bay Street bike rack underneath is always full because that's how people are getting to work in Westshore.
Wow.
And that is what we hear now more often of, oh, I had a guy and he got hit right on a sidewalk. Okay, well, let's talk to somebody about the sidewalk. Let's see if we can do something about this. Let's make sure we can co-locate bike racks and fix-it stations and pump stations so that when you do go to work on a bicycle, you have the same options as if you drove to work.
Well, that's what a real city is, right? I mean, I think you just said your family's from New York. Yeah? In New York, like, I don't know, you leave your apartment, you get coffee, you go to the gym, you shower out, like everything you need is outside of your apartment, outside of your home. And it doesn't require a car to go to A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You just go A to B and B through Z is solved for you, right? So it's almost like kind of what I'm envisioning for Westshore is this new version of similar to what a downtown is, where you have everything you need. The employee that lives in Brooksville, who works at Geico, drives down in the morning, parks, lunch, work, gym, kids come hang out after, movie, Westshore Mall, like all of it is able to be accomplished without a car. You come in, you enjoy it for the entire day, and then you leave. Versus, I mean, now it's like, oh, we work at this office building. Well, okay, let's get lunch at Seasons 52. Hop in the car, get there. Envisioning this district as an urban development as a whole, including transportation, ground floor retail, beautiful boulevards with shaded trees for people to walk on in the hot summer months and days like today where it's like, I don't know, medium heat, right? All the above, right? So from your position, right, the executive director, from what you described today, am I wrong in saying that that is the trajectory you and your organization want to kind of take this district?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it should be a premier mixed-use district. And we've made that transition over time. But the thing that's holding us back at this point is infrastructure. We don't have the surface streets. I mean, the interstate's being rebuilt. The bridge has been rebuilt. We don't have the surface streets to support mixed use because we don't have transit access. We don't have enough pedestrian access. So that's a major issue. We've seen it, with the residential buildings post Helene, post Milton. They did all right because they were built to the modern standard, but the stormwater was not built to the modern standard. We still rely on Fish Creek, which goes back probably 150 years to help drain Westshore. We had power outages during Helene and Milton, especially during Milton. The power outage wasn't because that there was flooding. The poles fell into the road. The lines were there, but they fell into the road. Why aren't those lines being buried? That's something we work with TICO on, and TICO's engaged with us on that. How do we bury those power lines in Westshore Boulevard? Because you bury those power lines in Westshore Boulevard, you don't just create the storm resiliency. Well, now you have a 10-foot wide path that's a sidewalk. Same is true on Spruce. We talked about the Spruce Street ditch. You can still move the same amount of stormwater, but now someone could actually walk on top of it because there'll be a 10-foot wide path. That connection between development and infrastructure is why we exist. Mm-hmm. Because the development came to Westshore because of that's where the interstates met. So now in modern times, you still need those interstates. But to your point, well, now you need the walkability. Now you need the transit access. Because for all of Tampa, for all of the United States, with the exception of maybe New York, Boston, Chicago, most people are going to get to work by car. So that's not going to change. We're not trying to change that part of it. But can your trips be reduced? You think of those office buildings that have coffee shops and gyms in them. That was a way to reduce the trip. So
Exactly.
the employee didn't have to leave the building. Well, now we don't want the employee to leave the district. And making sure that if they want to go to Maggiano's down the street for lunch, that they can walk. We had an event recently at the Marriott Hotel. I had multiple people come up to me and tell me that they walked. We don't normally have events where people tell us they walked to the event. But it was on Westshore Boulevard. People were across the street. It was a nice day out. There's new shade trees because of Westshore City Center and the work that Franklin Street's doing. It made sense. And that's the story that we want to hear more often in Westshore, because if you have that, you have a dynamic community. If you have a dynamic community, you have a resilient community. And a resilient community is going to be successful.
I can tell you that it's happening all over the city. David and I walk from the studio to go to lunch. I walk in my neighborhood on the weekends to my little coffee shop. It's not easy, and I'm scared. I got my wife and my baby with me. It's a little difficult. The sidewalks are broken. Some of the crosswalks aren't painted, but I can tell you that it's shifting and people are walking. It's not that this conversation we're having, the developers in the city wants to create a walkable environment. No. People that live here and work here are attempting to walk. We need to make it safer for them. We need to catch up essentially with the demands of these employees and these residents. I mean, if people are walking to your event, why are they doing that? Would they do that 20 years ago? Maybe not. Maybe 20 years ago there was less traffic. You just hop in your car, no big deal, whip into the parking lot. Times have changed and people are walking as a viable alternative. But because we're so far behind, the roads they're crossing, the sidewalks they're walking on, there's no shaded trees. There's no crosswalk sometimes. People are dodging traffic, running in and out. It's kind of a dangerous thing. You mentioned people biking to work on like Hillsborough Avenue. Holy shit, I wouldn't do that,
I know people who do that. We have board members of ours who...
But what do you expect people to do with no alternative?
That's right. But we have folks who I know bike because they choose to. It's a nice day out.
Sure.
They like doing it. We do our surveys. We've tried our best to try to speak to people who are more, blue collar, working class, who have biking to work because they have to. But when you see those folks, they're pulling bikes off of, they're not buying $1,000 bicycles. They're not riding to work wearing spandex. They're wearing black pants and a black shirt because that's what they gotta wear as, a busser. That's what they gotta wear as a server. Rocky Point, which is part of Westshore, but for the purpose of this conversation, they are the largest. Rocky Point is the largest concentration of jobs without transit service. We did a pedestrian study on the Courtney Campbell Causeway, and it has a commute pattern, because what happens is you have people who are coming to work, obviously on a bicycle, walking, but they're coming from the Hart bus stop at Memorial and George Road, which is almost 2 miles away.
Holy shit.
So they're riding the Hart route, getting off there, and either walking or riding their bike through Skyway Park, down George Road through Skyway Park, and out onto the Causeway to work at the DoubleTree or the Current, or maybe they're employee with AECOM at the Waterford building. That's the type of stuff that I think we need to know more about, and we gather that data, and so we try to tell that story to make people understand this is what we need.
In the Northeast, you'll have these little teeny tiny, like I would just describe it as a Floridian, like a mini downtown. I mean, that's, in the Northeast, that's just a regular little community. You got a train stop, a couple places of employment, pizza place, breakfast spot, all right there. Does Rocky Point even have a Publix or
No.
a grocery store? I
No.
mean, how many people live? Pull up Rocky Point, David, on the map, because it's like its own little city, except it doesn't have a grocery store.
Well, and I've
it's
talked
a food
to
desert.
Tampa Fire Rescue. They have a major need for having better service out there because they have to send their trucks out onto the Causeway.
South, David.
Rocky Point Island, so a little further south. There you go. There's multiple large apartment communities.
Look at this. I mean, this is
on Rocky Point.
This is a lot of people that live and work out here. You've got what do you have? Office, hotel, the Shriners,
Shriners, yeah.
Shriners, international headquarters.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's a few hundred people that work there.
Mhm.
Apartment complexes. Is there really not a grocer? Am I wrong?
I don't even think there's a convenience store. So if
Holy shit, man.
your
I mean, think about what
your
we're
baby
talking
needs
about.
a pint of milk
The
at night.
hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands of people that interact with this entire island have no opportunity to get a gallon of milk and a dozen eggs. I always use that example. But there's a lot of communities in our region that are like this. They're really deserts. You look at them. I mean, when you're coming down 60, the Courtney Campbell, looking at Rocky Point, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like you got these buildings and hotels. It looks dense, right? It looks like its own little city. But there's nothing in there for people to run errands. Every single one of those people that needs anything has to hop in a car. And then we wonder why there's so much traffic. There's no opportunity for people to get the goods and services they need. I mean, it's a mixture of an antiquated model. Everything used to be car-centric. But now that Florida has, 24 million people living here, I think in Tampa Bay, there's now 4 million people, 1.4 million in Hillsborough. Pinellas has over 1 million people. We got to start developing these areas in a more mixed way. There's really no excuse anymore. You got to have some sort of commercial retail available for people in these communities. I mean, midday at work, what if you need to pick up a couple little things? Where do you go? Do people hop on the Courtney Campbell and drive into Westshore?
So there's a Starbucks. If you're going down the Courtney Campbell Causeway, going towards Clearwater, you'll notice there's a Starbucks sign on your right side of the street. People who work at Shriners or people at the work at the Waterford building cross State Road 60, which is actually a decent pedestrian intersection because the trail is there, so it is functional. But there's no sidewalk in front of the Shriners building on Rocky Point. So there's actually what's called a desire path. If you ever see grass where, there should be a sidewalk there, instead it just kind of rutted out, that's called a desire path or a cow path in some parlance. There's a lot of those in Westshore. And sometimes it's just that at the time, development didn't require it. The city just recently, discussed requiring all residential to have sidewalks. We actually have it where all commercial requires a sidewalk, even if you don't have that connection through our overlay. So that's the type of stuff that you need the infrastructure to support the development. But on the other side, if development isn't coming, what do you do to incentivize it? What do you make sure it happens? We've seen downtown, especially Channel Side, you required all those buildings to have ground floor retail. There's a lot of empty retail in Channel Side. The retail is in Westshore. There's a woman needs a pair of shoes in downtown. They got to go to Westshore to go get it.
I know.
And that's been true, for 30, 40 years now.
My wife and I, when my wife was pregnant for about 1.5 years, we rented a house on Davis Islands, which is a fantastic neighborhood. Guess what? Anytime we need anything, we drove out of our neighborhood, got on 275, and usually went to like the Target, right?
Mm-hmm.
All the stuff over in 275 in Dale Mabry. Now we live south of Gandy and much, much closer on Gandy, right? There was a Target and all that sort of stuff. Think about if downtown had retailers like that, how much more they would be used by all those residents. And then guess what? Now everyone's not on these highways and on Dale Mabry driving. They're making much shorter trips. Maybe you could even take the water taxi across from DI to downtown, right? The point is, have options for people. I think when you shove people into a box like in Rocky Point with single uses, that's where the problem is, because then everyone has to jump in a car to do anything and everything. The cow paths, we used to call them, that's Bayshore Boulevard. Like the entire sidewalk on Bayshore Boulevard should be extended by at least 18 inches or 24 inches. People are, you got like a rollerblader, a mom with a baby, and a dude on a bike all trying to fit within, what's the width of that? 6 feet, 8 feet? Does the Westshore Alliance have the capability to fund and take care of some of these cow paths, streets, or is it not designed and set up to do that?
Some of them we can take care of. The smaller sidewalks, I mentioned Shriners, but off of Spruce and O'Brien, there's actually a sidewalk there we've built previously off of Laurel, so we're trying to build the other version. We're trying to do the intersection improvements at Gray and Lois and Gray at Himes to support what we envision as the River to Bay Greenway. I mentioned Gray Street earlier, but you go out to Gray right now and you start to see there's green bicycle sharrows that indicate this is a safe path for bicyclists, safe path for pedestrians. So we're working with the city on the intersection improvements, but we need the city's help to come in and build the sidewalks where possible, especially a place like McDill, which is outside the West Shore district. But Gray at McDill is a dangerous intersection. It's a dangerous intersection for a car, much less, a kid walking across the street or, someone on their bicycle. So there's those types of projects that we could do the onesie twosies, but if you're trying to hit a home run, you need public-private partnerships. You need the city to come in with a grant. You need some sort of, major level of investment. One of the things that we haven't done as well in Tampa is basically the Water Street model of you have a large private developer working with the city to provide that public infrastructure. There's so much of Water Street that was built by SPP that is really public facing. It's really meant to be public right of way. And I know you've interviewed some of the folks from there, but that's what need to happen in West Shore. But we don't have a CRA. We don't have a streetcar overlay where we could collect more dollars from that. So it's going to be a greater challenge in West Shore because we're going to need additional sources of revenue or some sort of acknowledgement from the city of Tampa of, okay, you private developer, you say you're going to build this thing. We'll give you this entitlement. We'll give you this right, but we also need X, Y, and Z to happen. And then you create something for the public benefit.
And that goes back to the Westshore Mall redevelopment. That's why you believe that really is the major opportunity right there.
And Westshore Mall, absolutely. There's still some space at International Plaza. There's Met West is pretty well built out. But there's even one more parcel potentially at Midtown. They have the surface parking lot at the intersection of Himes and Cypress.
I, for a split second, forgot Midtown was part of Westshore. It's kind of the name Midtown did originally. Did you feel like that should have been called something Westshore, or did you guys kind of see, you're on the fringe anyway? It makes sense.
I think they chose Midtown because it's meant to be between West Shore and downtown. But if you ever look at the city of Tampa's neighborhood maps, there's kind of a gap between Himes and really it was up to Rome at one point, but that led to the creation of Armory Gardens around Howard, Armenia. Oakford Park is that neighborhood that is just south of Midtown, but they needed a brand. Back in the day, there's been developments called Tampa One, Tampa Sphere. That's been in that area between 275 and West Shore there. 275 and Dale Mabry there. So, Midtown, also the Bromley family is from New York. They have assets that are in Midtown Manhattan. So I think that was part of also their connection as well, is that this is a family history. And they had a great relationship working with the mayor so that they could develop during COVID. Mm-hmm. They shut down New York City, but the mayor worked with them to allow them to have their buildings built, especially the hotels ahead of the Super Bowl.
Yeah. It's a great development. It's smack dab in the middle. Nick Haynes kind of explained the entire story behind it. So that episode will come out in a couple weeks, but it's really interesting. I remember when it was first announced as Midtown, a lot of the old heads in Tampa were like, Midtown, what? That's West Shore, blah, blah, blah. But if you really think about where that community is, it is Midtown. I mean, it really is in the center of downtown and West Shore proper, I would say. So it makes sense. I think that model almost exactly where you're providing adequate and easy transportation in and out with vehicular traffic, but then you also have a really good experience as a pedestrian when you're inside the development. That makes sense for the West Shore Mall redevelopment. I would assume whatever developer picks that up will have a sort of similar model. And what you said was interesting, where maybe you keep the mall sort of as a phase. You develop out on the street where the surface parking is on West Shore. And then as time goes by and there's success there, you extend it, where the mall is. That's kind of.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen now, because now they have the Macy's property. It's being marketed as all 54 acres. The question is, how do they phase it? Midtown, the story of Midtown is they kind of had 9 out of 10 things, and the 10th ends up being the Tico building. Water Street was a little more one at a time, because they had USF, the med school. They knew if we can get this as the anchor, then everything can follow, but also had Amalie as the anchor as well. So with West Shore 54 as it's being marketed, what do they decide to do? I think one interesting element about WestShore Plaza, the new version of it, is that it can have medical office, skilled nursing as a component. That is a major need. We need more medical. We need some sort of medical arts district. We need something from that, interests for West Shore. The fact that you've seen it be successful downtown, well, West Shore has access to the airport, West Shore has regional access more so than downtown Tampa. Is that a possibility? And maybe that becomes the anchor, some sort of medical office, some sort of skilled nursing, rehabilitation hospital, maybe even. Who knows? But that element, maybe that is the anchor, and you kind of build out from there rather than building out from West Shore Boulevard.
Right. Do you know do they have an asking price or anything? Can that be revealed?
I don't know what that number would be.
Sure.
I mean, you think of if you're selling 54 acres in Tampa, Florida, it's probably going to be pretty high. But it's also in an area, just like the rest of Florida, that's dealing with hurricanes. So there's certain land, whether it be building code, land uses, elevation of land that you have to deal with. So people are going to have to be patient. It's not going to take, okay, it's sold, and then we're going to start knocking stuff down and building stuff up.
It's not going to be like a Water Street.
It's not going to happen that quick.
And even Water Street, what people don't know is Water Street was a 15-year process.
Yes.
You hear the announcement and they work with the city, and then they put the shovels in the ground and boom, the whole thing's built. It's not going to go like that. It'll be a little bit different of a story.
They had to file legislation at the state level to do some of the things that they did. And that was back in 2016, 2017, 2018.
They had to file years of behind the scenes acquisitions and stuff like that. That's why it's interesting. This whole thing's available. I mean, it might even be a group that's never done business in Florida before that's interested, like a very large institution of some sort from Washington, D.C., right? Who knows? Something like that. But it is exciting. I think whatever that relationship is between that developer and the city, there's got to be some good faith on both sides to accomplish what we've talked about today. All that connectivity, that West Shore Boulevard, like that has to be a piece of that pie. It's got to be. That
connectivity can make or break a project like this. When Midtown came in, the city was working on Himes. And Midtown is the one who really finished Cypress Street. And then obviously FDOT had Dale Mabry in 275. At Westshore Plaza, the biggest road there is Westshore Boulevard, which is county owned. So you're going to have to have some sort of tri-party agreement between the city and county and Westshore Plaza to figure out what happens on that stretch of roadway. And that's the part that I don't think we really thought about. And you also need the county to play ball when it comes to the transit access and making sure the funding is there, because if you're going to have that project go forward with the reduction of parking spaces, you need all three options to get there. And right now, you only really have the highway option. You need to make sure the transit and the pedestrian follow as well.
Do you feel like the city and the county will be agreeable on kind of what we've talked about today and prioritizing the connectivity in this boulevard model for Westshore Boulevard?
I don't know. I mean, we as a Westshore Alliance have tried for years to get a different philosophy for Westshore Boulevard.
Yeah.
Westshore Boulevard from Gandy to the airport is a county road. And that kind of explains why it's kind of helter-skelter in some places. There's also the fuel line for Tampa International Airport runs on the road in some places. It is a major thoroughfare because people from Pinellas County will often use it to get to MacDill Air Force Base. But it's also an old country road. Some of those weaves and turns
through neighborhoods.
At Beta Bay.
Yeah.
They put in a pocket park there and installed speed humps and a crosswalk, and people complain because it slowed down the road. I mean, that's a road that needs to be safer. But there's pushback from the neighborhood saying, well, why'd you put a crosswalk here? It's too dangerous. How do we manage those competing elements? Because there are people who say, well, you can't do this, it's too dangerous. And people say, you have to do this, it's too dangerous.
Right.
And then you have a developer coming in saying, well, I need to be able to build this project.
Well, at the end of the day, you kind of have to put a weight on the importance of voices, right? Mm-hmm. So whose voice would necessarily be more important? Is it the commuter? Is it the person that doesn't live here, but they use Westshore as a road to get from A to B? What's their priority? Pedestrian safety? No. Speed, efficiency. I don't want to sit in traffic. I want to get to where I need to go, right? Okay, well, that's completely different from if I have a house off Westshore Boulevard, I am prioritizing pedestrian safety. I want to cross the street and go to that pocket park, right? So what weight do you place on those two voices is, I think, the answer to that. And I would hope that the city and the county government prioritize the people that live in that neighborhood. I really would.
Well, that's a challenge for Tampa right now, right? I mean, you mentioned 1.4 million people live in Hillsborough County. The 0.4 is Tampa. Tampa is outnumbered not just by Hillsborough County. From a regional scale, Tampa is outnumbered by Pasco County. So how do we make sure we have a regional transportation network, but also understand the fact that someone lives here? This is a residential neighborhood. This has been a residential neighborhood before the road showed up.
Yeah.
So how do you find that balance? And that goes back to the safety argument. Can you build a complete street? Can you build a street that's safe for all users? And that's unfortunately one of our biggest issues.
But is also efficient and can move an adequate amount of traffic.
Well, and a complete street should be efficient. You should have the right light timing. You should have the right size sidewalk so people don't have to get into the road. You should have a bike lane in some cases so that bicyclists don't have to travel in the main travel lane, that they have their space that they need. A lot of times it's just, well, this is too hard, so we're not going to do it. And then someone gets killed. We worked on a project at Boy Scout Manhattan, a traffic signal there, that was not in any plan whatsoever. We created a transportation action plan, and that project was actually identified by the neighbors in Lincoln Gardens, Carver City, as well as parents who dropped their kids off at Roland Park and Jefferson, which are both magnet schools. That intersection was one of the most dangerous intersections in Hillsborough County. FDOT didn't even have in their plan. Well, now there's a traffic signal there because of our plan, because of our transportation committee. We got that done. We don't have business communities. We don't have business organizations in every part of the town. But we also don't have business organizations always that are connected to neighborhoods. And while there may be conflicts in Westshore from a development perspective, we can work with the neighborhoods on transportation. And frankly, you saw it in 2018 with All for Transportation. That was a business-driven, people-powered campaign to fund transportation throughout Hillsborough County, and it won, and it passed. And not only that, the CIT renewal that we just had, same thing. People never thought that would pass. It should have been 30 years, ends up being 15. Okay, fine, but we got it done. And I think that's what I want people to understand, is that there are going to be natural conflicts when it comes to development, because businesses want one thing and residents may want something else. But on quality of life, especially quality of life as it relates to transportation and resiliency and infrastructure, there is a connection. Mm-hmm. So we should be able to work together from that perspective.
Including availability and affordability of housing. I mean, we talked about this entire district kind of being an all-encompassing district where you could live, work, play, etc. And when everything is connected in an easier way, it actually helps with housing affordability and availability. The more supply, the less pressure on demand, thereby lowering the price level. And then you also have the transportation factor. If I could live in the West Shore district and get to work without a vehicle, and I didn't even have to own a vehicle, I mean, hell, I'm connected to the airports right there. Maybe I can get wherever I need to go without a car. That's a massive expense you can take off of someone's burden. And then the complete street concept, right? Can you create a street that has less lanes of travel, wider sidewalks, trees, parking, bike lane, pedestrian crosswalks, slow down? Example, West Shore Boulevard, they put the speed bumps and the crosswalk to the little pocket park. Is that going to make traffic slower? Yes, if you don't do anything else. If you have no other viable options, yeah. So it's like we have to have these complete streets, but then we also have to have a real transportation plan. Of course, if you have the same given number of people on a much, much smaller, slower road with speed bumps, yeah, it's slower, but it's actually not slower if you include other transportation options. It's actually more efficient.
Correct. And the model for that is look what St. Pete and PSTA did with the Sunrunner. They run that on First, right? People complain, oh, now I'm going slower. I'm going so much slower. And FDOT's like, you're going the speed limit now. And not only are you going the speed limit now, but there's less incidents on this corridor. So all the people complain they were going slower, they were going 10 miles over the speed limit. The speed limit is there for a reason. Now the road design can match the speed limit.
Exactly.
And that's where the efficiency lies. The inefficiency is on the road where you're speeding or when a driver is speeding and they have to slam on the brakes because they got to make a left turn. And you're on a lane. We saw it with Bayshore, the improvements that were made. And they added those mid-block crossings. Why they add those mid-block crossings? Because someone was speeding and someone tried crossing the road where they had the right to, and they got hit by a car and killed. We need way more mid-block crossings. I've seen in my neighborhood, people complain that they add 4-way stops. There's a walkable school 2 blocks away, and people complain that there are 4-way stops.
Who's the people, though? People who live right there? I bet they don't complain.
Sometimes they do because, well, I don't walk, or my kid doesn't go to that school. What do I care? And I think that's the part that when we have these arguments, to your point about what voices are we listening to, we got to make sure that very quickly we take out those arguments of the, well, I'm not going to use it. You're right. You're probably not going to use it. You're probably never going to ride that bus. But the nurse at the hospital does. And when you get transported to TGH or St. Joe's or wherever, you better make sure that that nurse got to work on time. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. So yeah, you never rode that bus, but that nurse did. And that nurse is going to save your life.
And your children might be crossing that street.
Exactly
right. And
right.
your friends might be crossing that street.
Exactly right. Your employees might be crossing that street.
And guess what? You might not ride the bus, but a hell of a lot of other people will.
100%.
And then those are people that won't be in cars, thereby alleviating traffic for you. It's
exactly
all connected. Right. And I think more people need to hear that. It's all connected. Transportation really is the foundation of our economy. It's the way goods and services are moved from A to B.
It's why Tampa exists. We are an inland port, and Henry Plant had the idea to build a railroad here. We would not exist if we did not have the transportation network we have. Even Westshore. Westshore exists because it's the intersection of the interstate and State Road 60. And the airport is in a prime spot because of it.
So we've been going, 2 hours, David? Holy smokes. Thank you for sitting with me here today. This has gone by so quick. We could go a lot longer.
I'm David, I hope you have good editing. I really apologize, but
oh my God, you kidding? You've been great. Last thing though, you mentioned Bay to River Trail.
River to Bay Greenway.
River to Bay
that's
Greenway.
That's what we're trying to call it that.
Explain this to me. This sounds fascinating.
So, David, I hate to ask you to do something, but if you want us to zoom out a little bit. So, let me kind of imagine you're a driver on Kennedy Boulevard, okay? You're driving down Kennedy, and you're like, all right, I'm coming up to Dale Mabry, going towards downtown. All right, I'm in traffic. I got to get out of this traffic. You turn north into the neighborhood, and you see, oh, Gray Street. I can cross Dale Mabry here. There's a light at Gray Street. So you cross at Gray. You get to Himes, and you're like, oh, man, I can't go across Himes now. There's a plastic barricade here. That plastic barricade is the first leg of Gray Street as a pedestrian-friendly path. And what we imagine as the River to Bay Greenway. That corridor was part of a project bid by the city of Tampa, try to get funding from the Bloomberg Foundation to support cycling infrastructure. But if you look at Gray, and you could see it if you're watching on the YouTube link, but right there, Gray between Himes and Dale Mabry is a pocket park, Kathy Echeverria Green Space and Oakford Park. There are multiple parks, schools, the JCC, a block or two off of Gray Street. And Gray Street is naturally used by folks on Strava, on different cycling apps. They all identify Gray as a primary corridor for bicycling because you have a stoplight at Westshore Boulevard. You have a stoplight at Dale Mabry. When you get to McDill and Howard Armenia, it's a little bit of a struggle. But then once you clear that, you get to Rome. You have the new wide sidewalks on Rome. You have the new bike lanes on Rome. You have a stoplight at Rome and Kennedy, so you could go north, go south. You can go north to get Cash Street. Improving that corridor is not just economic development, it is quality of life, because there's so many homes in that corridor where they don't have curb and gutter, they don't have any sidewalks. But if there is a city strategy to improve these neighborhoods, that's one place where you can start, because you need to resurface all these roads for drainage purposes. You need to provide sidewalks, and it's a safe pedestrian corridor, and you know that because so many people already use it to this day. We identified Gray because we had a consultant who did our transportation action plan who rode his bicycle from Ybor City to Rocky Point. And he rode it multiple times and he didn't die.
Oh my God.
So it must work. And
he's going to pick my lottery numbers next week.
This is the missing link in a regional trail network. We're going to have the Howard Frankland Trail and the Courtney Campbell Trail, and you cannot get to them from them to the Riverwalk. Gray is the way you get there.
And David, go west on Gray towards the airport. Now, so Gray connects to Cypress Point Park?
When 275 is rebuilt, you'll be able to go under 275 at Occident, and that will get you up to Cypress Street. And Cypress Street will take you to Cypress Point Park.
Got it.
And the Courtney Campbell Causeway. We're also looking at a plan with FDOT to make sure that there's Kennedy Boulevard between really what is Memorial and Westshore Boulevard is safer, because that's a part of Kennedy Boulevard FDOT has not really touched yet.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can make that a safer pedestrian corridor, well, now you could get up to Beach Park, Hoover, and the Howard Frankland Trail. There will be a Howard Frankland Trailhead at the end of Rio Street and Executive Drive there, and potentially at Gray. They haven't quite pinpointed the spot yet, but this time next year, the Howard Frankland Trail will be opened. So you will be able to ride your bicycle or walk across the Howard Frankland Bridge. There'll be comfort stations, there'll be shaded areas. You'll have that on the Howard Frankland.
Wow, that's incredible. I think that would be a total game changer. And for those of you that don't know, Cypress Point Park, I used to go there and park, and I was training for a hike. And I used to go from there all the way to Clearwater. It's a really beautiful trail. It goes along the airport. It's super unique. I don't know if a ton of people know about it. I usually wouldn't pass many people walking on it. It was kind of COVID then, but yeah, it goes like all the way along the airport through Rocky Point, across the Courtney Campbell. The Courtney Campbell has that incredible trail. So what you're describing, like you could bike from Clearwater to Ybor City?
For sure. The Courtney Campbell Trail was actually an initiative of the Westshore Alliance working with the Courtney Campbell Scenic Highway Committee. I think it's about 12 years old now, the actual structure. But when it lands in Tampa, it wraps around the airport interchange. So if you're ever kind of traveling past the airport and you look to your right and you see that black fence and you see like, oh, there's a little road over there. That's not a road. That's actually a trail. And that's the trail that connects back to Cypress Point Park. You can see it when you get off at Cypress off of State Road 60. But having that there makes Westshore the hub of a regional trail network. And we see more and more people using the trail. We just had a Bike Westshore trail ride. We had 2 of them in March because March is Florida Bike Month. We had 30, 40 people on these bike rides. I couldn't believe it. Wow. And I work for the company. Like, where did all these people come from? But there is this real desire and this real interest to get out. And sometimes all it takes is just showing what's possible for what's already there. And it's a very safe route because of the fact that a lot of it is not road-based. It is trail-based. It is off the road. You are separated in most cases with, trees or grass or what have you. You're not riding on the road.
And then the last thing I wanted to talk about is this mural you guys just had done. This thing's massive. Pull that up, David. It's on the PowerPoint. It's the last slide. It's super cool.
It is the largest mural since the Bill Poe garage mural in Tampa. So this is the garage at Avion Park. So if you're on Spruce Street, head towards the airport, heading west, you'll see this. The artist, Jay Giroux from Greater Public Studio, did the artwork. It is sort of a mockingbird becoming an aircraft, like 747, becoming a bird, becoming an airplane. And a mockingbird, obviously a famous bird for the South, but the mockingbird is kind of a tough bird, and they work together, so there's kind of the sports influence there. And then the McKibben family, McKibben Hospitality, they own and operate Avion Park and the hotels there. But J.B. McKibben IV, his grandfather founded the company, and he was a World War II aviator.
Oh, wow.
And so this is all kind of interconnected, and we as the Alliance, we support the project with a small grant. But McKibben put up like $45,000, $50,000 to this project.
Wow.
We work with them to select an artist, so that ended up be Jay Giroux. But we've done now 3 murals in the Westshore District, working with our foundation or our organization, our 501c6 nonprofit, not-for-profit organization. But people like the murals.
Yeah.
It creates that sense of place, like you discussed earlier. And the more we can create that sense of place, the more ownership there is in the district, whether you're a worker or whether
Right.
you're a
Or
resident.
just passing through, yeah.
And then you then start to think, wait a minute, well, we could do this, well, we could do that. If we could do that, then we could do this other thing.
All of that stuff is connected, including burying the utility lines. It's just the reason is people are paying much more attention when they're outside of their vehicle. And when they're walking on a street, even when they park in this parking lot and they get out, it's something nice to look at. Burying those utilities is a part of that too. The mural, the streetscapes, the lighting. I mean, everything being done is in a really positive direction. And I think with what we've talked about today, I'm just stoked about Westshore. I think it's going to be a destination. I think people are going to go there and park and enjoy their whole Saturday. Maybe you don't park at the mall and spend the whole day there. Maybe you park at one of the malls. There's a shuttle to the next mall, restaurants in between. It's super cool, man.
Well, I tell people, if you want something to do, come join us, come be a member, come get involved, because there's a lot to do in Westshore. And we've been fortunate enough to get a lot of things done the last few years since COVID, but we got a long way to go.
What's your website? If people want to become a member, how can they do that?
ChooseWestshore.com. And it's pretty much standard, like any chamber of commerce, but we have this mission to improve the Westshore District. But I would say, working for all the business organizations I have, if you're a company in town, if you're someone who just cares about this stuff, get involved, whether it's the Westshore Alliance or somebody else, because there's a place for you to get involved. And we have so much that needs to be done. We've saw it after these 2 hurricanes. There's a long way to go post-recovery. So how do we make sure that we recover, but also plan for the future?
We will leave it at that. That was great. Listen, thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on the show. All right, that's it. Bye, everybody.